Hi everyone, for this project I'll show you how I made a custom leather dog collar for my dog Rigby. I started by marking out the lengths I would need to forge the buckle, the long side, the short side, and half the distance of the long side. I flattened the end of the rod so it would form a lap joint when I brought it together to form the buckle. This is 1/4 inch W1 drill rod I'm using for the buckle, the pin, and the D-ring. So now that I've got my 90s forged in for all the different sides, I'm marking the last little section, half length of the long side, and cutting it off on the Hardy cutoff tool. Then I can just twist each side into the rectangular buckle shape. Once I had the pin roughed out, I flattened one end of it. That'll be the end that I'll bend over and it'll hook over the side of the buckle and hold it in place. I also flattened both ends of the D-ring so that it would form a lap joint when I brought it together to form the ring. My original plan was to forge weld the ends of the buckle and the D-ring, but the pieces were so small and cooled off so quickly, the forge welding just wasn't happening, so I ended up using my MIG welder to weld those ends together. Once I had the pieces all forged, I went in with the hand file, took off the rough edges and filed them down. Then I was ready to fit up the pin to the buckle. Once I had the pin fitted onto the buckle, I could bend the pin into a more conventional shape and also put a notch for the tip of the pin to rest in the buckle. For the leather part of the collar, I used 7 to 8 ounce Veg Tan leather. They're just cutting it out to length, marking the hole for the pin to rest in, and then cutting out that hole. There I'm just measuring out the hole placement for the end of the collar to fit up with the buckle and cutting that out. I decided I wanted to wet form the end of the collar where the buckle fit, so put the leather into water for a few minutes and pressed it into shape and let it dry so it would hold the shape. And while the leather was drying, I went ahead and marked the end of the pin on the buckle and cut that off so it would fit up correctly to the buckle. Then all I had to do was file off the rough end of that pin. I was going for a rustic look on the hardware for this collar, so I decided to do an etch in ferric chloride and follow that up with some WD-40 just to clean it off, remove the ferric, and give it a darker oxide layer. And then for the final step on that, just followed with some clear spray paint and let it hang dry. So then I moved back over to working on the leather, putting in some decorative border marks, as well as customizing the collar and stamping in the name. The dye I used for this project was Phoebing's Pro Dye. The color was light brown. After the dye had dried, I applied some Phoebing's Atom Pro Wax and let that dry and buffed that off. The next step was to fit up the buckle and the D-ring and mark out my holes for the rivets, and punch those holes and attach the rivets. I wanted to have stitching running the length of the collar, so the next step there was to go ahead and punch the holes so that we could sew the threads. I used a basic saddle stitch for this. For the end where the buckle and the D-ring were, I wanted some extra strength, so I actually ran 2 saddle stitches through each hole, one going from one hole to the next hole, and then one stitch where I wrapped over the edge of the leather to hopefully give it more strength. I'm not sure if there's a name for this kind of stitch. There might be. I don't even know if I did it the correct way, but I think obviously it created a stronger stitch. For the rest of the collar, just did a simple saddle stitch along the length of the collar. There I'm applying a little water to the edge and burnishing the edges. I had a couple of decorative pins I wanted to add, so I punched the holes and set those on either side of the name. I applied some Phoebing's mink oil paste to waterproof and seal the leather. Let that dry and then buff that out to give the leather a nice shine. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.